I would like to ask you a question. Thank you for your talk and sharing your perspective on positionality and the ways it can shape our research approaches. I'm curious if you're comfortable sharing. How do you see your own positionality influencing your work and the interpretation you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I have this methods paper from 2020 that I'm really interested in writing like my methods and methodology writings are what get me citations and what I tend to get known for rather than the substantive content, which is a funny aside. I talk about something called the ethnographic toolkit. And here I talk about how researchers, we all have visible and invisible tools and backgrounds and knowledges and positionalities that change. So when I'm in the Philippines, yes, I'm Filipino American. In my book, I talk about this. I start off the preface, for example, with a story about my grandma. So my mom had me when she was 15. My mom was born in the Philippines. My grandma had her at 19. And my grandma migrated to the US through marriage to a US serviceman. And that is kind of how she raised me. And so that is how I grew up. And she was very much like, you're an American. And so when I started taking Tagalog classes, because she refused to teach us, I did a Fulbright, I did a heritage program in the Philippines. And when I'm there, I still have family in Subic Bay. My Tita Linda, helped me navigate bureaucracies. And I think what's really important is so when I talked with both sex workers as well as mothers of immigration children who had US servicemen as fathers, is I would relate as talking about my grandma and her migration. She's often seen as a sex worker by people who migrate in similar circumstances. But I also understand how when I try to match, right? Researchers, often positionality and reflexivity are considered kind of in writings, oh, I'm X, therefore I got access. But instead, I shift to kind of understanding this as relational and that we have these tools that we highlight or we don't in particular circumstances. And sometimes those aren't matched, right? I would try to give an interview in Tagalog to a Filipino government official, and he would speak in English, right? Like it was very clear he was not interested. And so in that way, kind of the ways in which we perform or present ourselves is not static, it's relational. And very much thinking about, if I were to write the book now, I'd write a very different book than I did before. And I think for me, that's a sign of intellectual growth. I would have kind of interrogated things much more. But I think that one of the things to keep in mind is that even if we share some characteristics with people we study, by our training, by being a researcher studying it, there is no true insider, right? Like I don't believe that there are any insiders, and kind of essentialist understandings of how our characteristics shape our access. It's really harmful, but it's the default when people say, well, I'm from X community and therefore I have this kind of access. And I also, so I write a lot about thinking about power, thinking about all of these things. So I hope that's helpful.